was not that, but again, where we finally finished for a while when we were at down 1595, finishing 1175. Again, we also showed you a map of the world there going into today. All the Asian markets were down. I remember even before the Super Bowl game when we had our first read of the futures, and they were down more than 100 points. Steph and I were communicating and saying, this could be an interesting Monday. And sure enough, the Asian markets tumbled first. Japan now back in negative territory for the year. That extended through much of Asia, carried on into Europe. All the world's major markets are now back underwater. Now, remember, some of them had been appreciating faster than we had this year. Now, does that mean it's all over? Far from it, but history is an inconsistent guide on this subject. Let's ask Scott Martin, the Chief Investment Officer at Kingsview Asset Management. So, Scott, let me ask you, young investors who are just getting into this market see a day like this, and, their heinies get burned, and they wonder, my gosh, what do I do? What do you tell them to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, Neil, that they're getting rocked a bit. But I'll tell you what's interesting. You look back, and you talked about it with the panel with the guys beforehand. You look back at 2017, which was a great year by many stretches, right? And you have the S&P 500, Neil, that moved over 1% intraday, or during the day, rather, finishing closes 8 times during the year, right? So that's not a normal volatility environment with respect to any historical average. And so when you look at the fact that the S&P 500 was so quiet last year, and so those new investors that have come in almost expecting things to continue like so are getting a rude awakening. And the reality is, I hate to say that this is normal and to be expected because these numbers are a little bit extended, but when volatility does come into the market, that's the market being the market. And you have to, as an investor, especially being a long-term one as I am, as a lot of my clients are, you have to take these as opportunities for the longer-term investor who wants to accrue stocks here.
I mean, normally in every downdraft in the market, I'm not saying this is at all like an 87 experience, because it's not. I mean, that was the Dow losing a quarter of its value, and that was in a single day. It had actually been cut in half if you included the sell-off that was going into August and September. Leaving that aside, normally you wait to see some big, brave names come in or companies buying back stock. IBM was a buyer back then. The famed investor Fidelity, Peter Lynch, was a buyer back then. Warren Buffett, a buyer back then. If you go fast forward to 9/11, when airline stocks were pummeled, and then Warren Buffett and some of these other big names dove in to buy them, George Soros, among others. We don't see that yet, or probably we don't get reports on that yet, probably too early. But would that be a reassuring event to you?
Yes, it would. Now, Scott Martin's doing it, but, I say that kind of joking. But, it is partly, you're right, it is partly some of those names that come in, and usually, you're right, Neil, it's after the fact. You hear about a couple buys a couple days later that come in and say this is where market valuations are appropriate. Now, I will tell you, if you look back in January, which was a great January, we've wiped out a lot of those gains depending on your favorite index. The market valuation, if I was to rate it on a 1 to 10, my friend, it's about even. It's really not that much overvalued. It's not undervalued, so it's about where the market should be. But you guys talked about in the previous panel the great economic data that's out there, the health of the banks, the strength of their balance sheets, the fact that we have this great tax cut that is now in place for 2018 and beyond. There's a lot of reasons that there's winds at our back still and not winds at our face like there have been in previous market corrections.
All right, my friend, thank you very, very much. Scott Martin, I want to take a